created by He who honors the feminine phenomena.
As I said, I called everybody together, the brotherhood together today because there are a lot of very serious matters that we have to deal with, a lot of very serious levels of comprehension that we must have in order to continue our surge into resurrecting this divine socioeconomic family community order. Also, has a deep need to have a connection beyond what has been given to us by the Babylon system mindset, what has been given to us by Western culture, and its ideology of self-asserted individualism. It was very clear that self-asserted individualism cannot possibly maintain the higher peace conscious resurrection of humanity. There's absolutely no ands, ifs, and buts about it. Because if you have several billion people focused on their identification of self and their individualistic motives beyond the motives of their ancestral presence, beyond the motives of anything else, beyond the motives of Mother Nature, then what you will get is self-destruction, self-destroying self. Because it's a competitive nature. It's so competitive that each self is going to be concerned about the preservation of self, and nobody truly concerned about the preservation of community, of family, divine socioeconomic family community order. As we sit in our beautiful, magnificent space and place of jungle in Belize, one of the last of the two rainforests in the Western Hemisphere, that's how fortunate we are. Because we're at least in a space and place where we can grow our food, our trees, and have the fresh environmental air, the sunshine, and be able to have intimate relationships with Mother Earth so we can grow into having a closer comprehension of the kind of intimate relationship we need to have with the feminine she, our sacred ancestral mother, the birthplace of all of man, he and she. We must comprehend that we've had a lot of misgiving, miscomprehension, misunderstanding, and no overstanding about our presence as male, and that in fact it's often forgotten that we're born of she, the feminine. It's often forgotten that without that feminine phenomenon, there's absolutely no way that we will have a nesting place for our birth. Now there's no ands, ifs, and buts about the fact that we've been groomed and conditioned within a monotheistic state of reasoning that highlights the macho male presence of man, he, as the almighty and omnipotent, which is the greatest farce that has ever been told, because it's absolutely impossible for he to survive without she. Anyone have any thoughts or questions about that? If it's a fact that he can't survive without she, then it's very clear that she can't survive without he. So the only obvious and most necessary thing that we all must get within our consciousness is that the divine union of man, he and she, is an absolute necessity for the survival of humanity. Common sense reasoning. Within that, he and she, without the unitary concept of ancestry, that is family, community, is a dead-end street. What happened is that the children of the sun, the melanin-encoded populations who were brought from that land of greatness, where all of humanity emerged from, who were brought by those children who became lost and astray within the pale consciousness of cold experiences, have caused a situation that's threatening our earth right now, and definitely threatening the children of the sun who are within this vibration of Western culture and elsewhere. But the reality is, what I'm saying is that one of the first elements necessary to destroy a population is to destroy the family community unit. That's understood, huh? Okay, if you destroy the family community unit, only then do you have the ability to destroy the family unit. And then if you're able to destroy the family unit, at that point you're actually able to destroy the union of he and she, splitting it, dividing it, conquering it, ruling it. As the old warlord saying was, kill the males, rape the females and birth your energy into her existence. And this is what has happened. Within our ancient Kemetic culture, we talk about the Asarian nature, and we talk about Asaria and the royal family of Set and Nebuchadnezzar. And we talk about the birth of those offspring, and when we talk about Set, Sutik, Satan, the self-asserted individualistic nature. That nature we tend to talk about, but a lot of people just simply got a lot of language or communications and do not even comprehend what our ancestors were leaving to us as a message so that we will maintain our survival. We are simply the reflection and the continuation of those ancestors who came before us, all the way back to our origin. That's why we are referred to, and this is why we honor, uphold, and maintain the first genesis of our existence as divine children of the Son within the sacred garden culture from which we come. It is clear, it's been evident, it's been written and comprehended. Although what we will realize is that most simply ignore the first genesis of our presence and go to what is called the second genesis, where all of a sudden there's a monotheistic nature that's brought forward, and that monotheistic nature went through some magic and etc. and produced a man, and the man interfaced with the animals and etc. became lonely, and then as a second notion, a female was blown up out of his rib. We know that the male does not have the capacity, naturally and innately, to birth. We know that is not his genetic quality. We know that the feminine, naturally and innately, has a genetic quality of birthing. She has a womb, the uterus, to carry the seeds of life. And ours is to transmit the seeds of life. 2 parts to one wholeness. We came as 2 parts to one wholeness. But if you're dealing with a divisive nature, it would then divide us into separate but unequal parts. So the feminine became unequal. She became lower and lesser, which let you know clearly that it was a monotheistic, a macho male-oriented vibration that created that particular genesis. It is not the first genesis. You'll notice very clearly that within the first genesis, what is being said by collective energies of most supreme unseen ancestral presence is let us make man in our own image, and man became a model of a creation, and within our own image he and she was manifested 2 parts to one whole. My point is that we must get to comprehending that, and if we can comprehend that we came 2 parts to one wholeness, only at that point in time do we have the ability to detox, purge, and heal from this divisive nature that has been presented to us, printed in our consciousness by a monotheistic, individualistic, self-asserted nature. And that's a point that we must comprehend. We must comprehend that one of the first ways that we as son children were divided within this Western hemisphere was immediately break the family community network. And that breaking actually occurred on that continent when it first started, the first divisive nature started. There's no question that that breakage was instigated by those who had begun to have a relationship with an energy that opposed our existence. I call it a relationship with that self-asserted, satanic nature that would disrespect the divine laws of the principles of Ma'at. And at that point in time, not honor, not hold to the principles of divine order, not hold to the principles of divine consumption, ignore the consumption of the fruits of the tree, ignoring the fact that the foods are medicine and that the herbs shall serve to maintain the healing qualities of our body, and that from that the fruits and the seeds and the nuts shall be consumed, and our body, we will dwell in a wholesome and healthy body. This is the nature of expression to our soul, from our soul, of our soul, embodied within our physical presence. And that has been broken. So with that breakage, what has occurred is an informal, a toxic nature of different sorts and break-offs of religious manifestations created by an astray mind of man, ignoring the holistic living vibration that has been given to us within that greatness of our ancestors who maintain and forwarded that to us to keep whole for these particular times. We're in very critical times. Survival is absolute necessity. Most are so lost, trapped in rhetoric, trapped in all the ways and means of postulating, talking about their alchemists and their this and their that, and having absolutely no unit of manifestation, glorifying in the individualistic nature of self and trying to become the big dog in that self-asserted experience, and actually having absolutely nothing to root the base of their foundation on. And this is what we have to make sure that we avoid. We have to make sure that we don't get into that self-asserted nature. That's why it's absolute necessity for each one of us to teach, each one of us to learn, and each one of us to help the other, essentially for the sake of our existence. That we cannot, as a collective body of masculine presence, within this generation of entity that we have, we cannot afford not to give all the assistance we can to each other. We have to bring this broken family community order back together again. And for those who are of another melanated, non-melanated, or have melanated culture, it's called, one is chattel slavery and one is indentured servitude. We have to recognize that those two elements were the most divisive elements that have occurred during these particular times. And the chattel slavery being primary. And in that, it produced feminines to be birth elements and masculines to be studs. Your only job is to hit and run. Is this not the same thing we're seeing today? 72 to maybe even further percentage of family units within the Western Hemisphere, specifically talking about that northern sphere, having no multi-family unit. Male, man, he and she. And if the male unit of man, he and she is essential from our birth, from our existence, it's got to be essential during these critical times of our presence upon the earth. So when we look at it, the breaking trace real easily back to that parallel where the male was broken from the female, and that his job was to serve massa and to work in that field and produce that vibrational product, so that the enrichment of that master-slave system could occur for master, and the enslavement broken further in the mindset of the slave. And even though many say, but that's back then, we don't need to talk about that now, that's an absolute, obvious, blatant deception. That's insanity. It will cause one to continue to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, which is insanity, because it has been implanted within the DNA and it continues to be transmitted until or unless a phenomena occur and we get in a unit, divine socio-economic family community order, and begin breeding, seeding, and feeding a new consciousness. And unless we do that, we got to comprehend that all that is being done is a continuous practice of insanity. Wishes, wants, hopes, dreams, prayers will not make it happen. Only action will make it happen. And one has to have the vibration of submitting, committing one's being to the idea, to the reality, to the consciousness that I'm going to devote my life experience to forwarding the sacred ancestral essence of all that became of I into the next generation. And then focus one's energy on resurrecting one's mental, physical, and spiritual consciousness, and stop playing in the mind, lazy and lethargic, thinking that it's going to happen by osmosis, or that all of a sudden someone's going to raise up and boom, and it's going to happen. Insanity. We have to get to work. And the work is within divine, social, economic, family, community, order. And that work must manifest within a sacred garden culture presence. Then we can forward our divinity as man, he, and she. And we actually owe that to our sacred ancestors. We actually owe that to the generation next. But what happens within self-asserted individualism is about I, me, my, mine, right here, right now. And fantasies about I, me, my, mine, right here, right now. I had a beautiful, magnificent soul who we opened the door to say very clearly to I that what my fantasy was, my dream, was to get a job within the same mindset that's been going on continuously over and over and over again, and no different results occurring except becoming more and more degenerated and depleted as a population. And in getting that job, I wanted to get me a piece of land because I'm conscious. I want to get a piece of land and I want to start a community. And it's like, this is a feminine she saying that within a vibration where males are just standing in line to prey on her, because that's what's been groomed, conditioned, and master programmed into the mindset of the male from the days of the chattel slavery study days. And her not having any better sense to know that what happened to her mama and her mama's mama and those around her is exactly what can happen to her. Or she will reverse. She will reverse her natural innate state in mental consciousness, biologically. And of course, all of this works to the benefit of the self-centered, individualistic nature of deification. Unless we can break that, there's no possibility of survival. It is a dead-end street. So we must work together. We must work for the benefit of each other. I make Myron one of my sons more than what he realized. We encountered a soul. We have one of our brothers who's in line to be mated. And he encountered a soul. The very first thing he did was to call I and let I know, as our spiritual elder, that there's a feminine soul, very beautiful, have the qualities that we have spoken of, at least in concept, and it could be molded, and saying very, very sincerely from the gut, I think if she could be put in your hand, there's a possibility, it's definitely a possibility for a resurrection within this communal nature. That's where we got to be. That's where we got to be. We have to be about looking out for each other. It's divine, social, economic, family, community order. We can't be about that self-asserted, individualistic nature anymore. It will destroy any male separate, any female separate that walks within that graveyard of toxic disorder. And it will continue the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. How many times have we seen a feminine she start a resurrecting vibration? Look toward this vibration. Ask I for entry. And then all of a sudden get caught up in that vibration of interference, interruption, detour. And the next thing we hear about that feminine she is, number one, she has repeated the parallel. She has a birth. Or two, the male is on his track as a rolling stone because he's been groomed and conditioned to be of a stud mindset. I mean, that's just the reality. And she's been groomed and conditioned to be a breeder. That's the mindset. That's the program. That program will continue into perpetuity until or unless a magnificent phenomenon occurs. And that phenomena is a she who has the ability, phenomena, to birth a new consciousness. And she cannot do it without he who has the ability to breed, seed, and secure, guide, and protect the feeding of a new consciousness. That's the reality that we have to deal with. That's the reality that's facing all of humanity. That's the reality that is facing the divine and sacred few. The divine and sacred few must take the lead. So you all don't have any choice. I didn't stand as the root, foundation, and base of this divine social, this Kwatamani, divine social, economic, family, community order, because I had a dream of sitting on top of the hill. Each one of you must be developed to take a leadership role within a wholeness, a collective wholeness, so that the masculine presence, who is naturally and innately designed to be the guiding and protective nature within divine socio-economic family community order, not a self-devised family nature, but within a divine socio-economic family community order. And the feminine, her natural innate state as a nurturing, affectionate nurturer of divine socio-economic family community order. That means that she nurtures the guiding and protecting energy of that male who's within divine socio-economic family community order, to be able to breed, birth the new generation of thought as the phenomena that we're talking about. And without that, there's absolutely no possibility of holistic living survival. There will be something out there for a period of time, and then it will continue a deteriorating, downward, self-asserted individual satanic movement into a lower master state. We forget that the ancestors made it very clear to us that Set is a lower and lesser God. That don't mean that Set is not a God of worship. As a matter of fact, when you look around, it is the master God of worship that is going on. It's just that the man, he and she, has learned to worship a lower and lesser energy. And we must be about the worship, the holding, to maintain the devotion of our life to higher peace conscious energy, the energy of our most supreme, seen and unseen ancestral spirit presence, the head of divine socio-economic family community order. And we realize that we didn't say he the head. It is he and she. Divine guidance and protection mated with divine nurturing and affection, producing divine socio-economic family community order. I hope we all clear. This is something that and I woke up with today, and the vibration of our most supreme ancestral presence, the divine union, expressed that this must be spoken today to the brotherhood and to the sisterhood. So I've carried out this task with the brotherhood. I say Madasi, Madasi, Madasi.
Overstand, said the old bold soul of the oldest old man who walked the land with a stick in his hand.